The dust clung to the hem of her dress like memories she couldn't shake, red clay dust, thick and dry, rising behind her in soft swirls as she walked the last mile into the town whose name she hadn't asked for. The road curved gently like a question unspoken, and the evening sun bled amber across the sky. Her boots, scuffed and long past their best years, struck the ground with steady purpose. She didn't walk like someone lost. She walked like someone done being chased. The first thing she saw of the town was the steeple, then the livery, then the crooked porch rails where men sat like shadows with nowhere better to be. They didn't rise. They didn't smile. They just watched, as men do when they think they're hidden behind silence. She kept her head down and her pace measured. No fear. No softness. Just movement. A woman sweeping the porch of the general store paused mid-brush, squinted, and gave the stranger a slow nod. That was all she got. That was all she needed. She passed the saloon without turning her head. Past the small schoolhouse with cracked windows and peeling white paint. She walked past the boarding house, then doubled back. It was the kind of place built for drifters and goodbyes. The sign swayed overhead in the wind, *rooms and meals*, painted in faded blue. Inside, a woman with gray hair pulled into a knot asked, "1 night or 2?" The traveler laid down a coin, enough for 3. They didn't exchange names. Upstairs, the room smelled of old wood and wild mint. There were 2 pegs for hanging things, 1 bed, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. She dropped her small sack onto the bed but didn't sit. Instead, she opened the window, leaned her elbows on the sill, and stared at the horizon like it might speak to her. The next morning, the sun filtered through sheer curtains, brushing the floorboards with gold. She dressed in silence and tied her hair back, knotting the scarf around her neck twice. Outside, the town was already awake, carts creaking, chickens arguing behind fences, a boy crying over something small and important. She found work not by asking but by helping. At the bakery, the flour sacks were too heavy for the old man unloading them. She stepped in, lifted one to her shoulder, and carried it without a word. When he tried to pay her, she only nodded once and returned the next day. That's how she stayed. The baker's sister had a new baby and little help. So the traveler swept, fed chickens, fetched water, and hushed the baby when it cried through the night. She was useful, and usefulness kept questions at bay. But the whispers began anyway. Not loud. Not cruel. Just curious. She don't talk much. Seems polite enough. Pretty, in that wild way. And then, from the porch where the men sat. Bet she's running from something. She was. But not the way they thought. It wasn't a man or a crime or the law. It was something older and harder to name. It was the memory of believing love would save her, and the day it didn't. It was the echo of her mother's voice, the way it once trembled in prayer, and the silence that came after the baby cried no more. It was her own reflection in a cracked mirror on a night she swore she'd never see 30. She was 25. Still breathing. Still running. But this place, this dry-lipped town with its slow clock and weathered fences, had a stillness to it. A patience. And somewhere in that quiet, she found herself breathing a little easier. He arrived the 3rd morning she worked at the bakery. Not through the front, but from behind, leading a mule with timber strapped to its back. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a worn brown coat. His boots were older than her fears, his eyes the color of wet ash. He didn't speak much. Didn't smile. Didn't linger. But he noticed her. Not with hunger. Not with intent. With recognition. Like he saw something familiar in the way she held her shoulders or moved with the weight of invisible things. She watched him, too, not with hope, but with the quiet observation of someone who's learned not to trust her own longings. He chopped wood behind the bakery, fixed a splintered railing without being asked, then disappeared for 3 days. The town called him the Quiet One. No one knew his full name. Just that he'd built his own cabin beyond the trees and came into town only when he needed to. Some said he'd been married once. Some said he'd been a soldier. Some said he drank himself into silence. But no one really knew, and no one dared ask. She didn't ask either. But the next time he came, she offered him bread still warm from the oven. He took it with a nod and left a silver coin, more than it was worth. She didn't watch him walk away, but she listened to the rhythm of his boots on the porch. It was slow. Steady. Like his breath didn't catch anymore when people looked too closely. That night, she sat on the back step of the bakery and watched the sky turn lavender, then blue, then ink black. Crickets chirped in the tall grass. The baby inside cried once and then stopped. And she remembered something her grandmother once said while braiding her hair by firelight, *, some places carry mercy in the air. You'll know when you find one. *. Maybe this was such a place. Or maybe she was only tired. She didn't dream that night, and that was its own kind of grace. The days blurred in rhythm. She swept. She baked. She mended. She did not speak much, but her silence softened. She started greeting the schoolteacher when they passed each morning. She smiled at the boy with the kittens behind the livery. She picked daisies on her walk home, even if she never kept them. One morning, she found the second man, the quiet one, already behind the bakery, hammering a loose board. She offered him coffee. He didn't refuse. They sat in silence, not facing each other. The sun warmed the side of her face. He spoke first, not looking at her. "You're not from here." "No one is," she said gently. He nodded. Sipped. Said nothing else. That was enough. From then on, their meetings became habit. Unscheduled, undemanding. He would appear. She would offer something, a drink, a chair, a word. He would accept or not. And then go. But one afternoon, while she was stacking flour inside the pantry, the first man appeared. He was the blacksmith's cousin. Too handsome, too loud, too sure. He'd watched her from the beginning. Now he smiled as if he'd waited long enough. "You need help?" he asked. She shook her head. He stepped closer. "I could take care of you. I'm already taken care of." He chuckled. "By who? The ghost behind the bakery? He don't even speak your name." She turned back to her work. He didn't like that. Later, she told the baker she'd like to stop working evenings. She said she needed rest. The baker didn't argue. But the blacksmith's cousin gave her a look the next time he passed, the kind that meant, "We're not done." She felt something inside her curl. Not fear. Not yet. But caution. She'd felt this before, this edge of things, when silence could become threat, when being too polite became permission. That evening, she walked to the creek outside town. The moon was a white coin tossed onto black velvet. The water whispered over rocks, steady and soft. She sat on the bank and took off her boots. Let her toes touch the cold. Let herself be nothing for a while. And then she heard it, the soft crack of a twig. She didn't startle. It was him. The quiet man. Standing just at the edge of the trees, holding something in his hands. He stepped forward, placed it on the grass near her, then nodded once and turned. It was a carved bird. Small. Whittled from cedar. Smooth and warm in her palm. She closed her fingers around it and didn't speak. Not then. Not yet. But she stayed there a long while after he left, watching the sky until dawn began to blush, wondering, not if he'd return, but when. Because something was shifting now. Not love. Not hope. But something softer. Something that asked nothing. And that was the first gift she truly trusted. He wouldn't look at her. Not directly. Not when she spoke softly behind him. Not when she handed him warm bread wrapped in cloth. Not even when she laughed once, unintentionally, when a squirrel stole her apple straight from her lap. He was always a little to the left of her. A little outside of comfort. A man carved in caution. It puzzled her at first. Most men looked too quickly, too long. Measured her with their gaze before she'd said a word. But he was different. Respectful, yes. Kind, in his quiet way. But always at a distance. As though the simple act of seeing her might undo something in him. He came to town on Thursdays now, with rope or nails or something too heavy for an old woman to carry. But mostly he came to repair things no one asked him to. A fence post. A bench leg. The hinge on the door behind the apothecary that squealed whenever the wind turned. And she began to understand. He needed excuses. Not for the world, but for himself. There was something inside him that refused softness. Something that flinched from tenderness like a wound still raw. She didn't press. Didn't speak when he stayed silent. She simply began to exist near him. Not as a question. Not as an invitation. But as a presence. One afternoon, the sky cracked open with rain. The kind that arrives all at once, like a dam breaking. She was returning from the creek, her dress heavy with water, hair clinging to her cheeks, the hem of her coat soaked to the knees. She ducked under the stable awning, heart thudding, unsure if she should run home or wait it out. He was there already, adjusting a saddle strap, half-shadowed in the gloom. He didn't turn. But he said, quietly, as if to the horse, "You'll catch cold." She smiled at the horse. "Then I suppose you'd better keep talking. So I stay warm." A pause. The soft sound of leather tightening. Then, "Where'd you go?" "The creek. Too far to walk in a storm." She leaned against the post beside him. "I didn't plan on rain. Storms don't always ask permission." She looked at him then. Not hard. Just enough to notice the way his jaw tightened and relaxed. The way his eyes stayed on the leather, not the woman beside him. "I don't mind storms," she said. He nodded. Once. The silence stretched. But it didn't feel empty. When the rain slowed, she stepped out first. He didn't follow. It became a kind of dance, unspoken and slow. She would find reasons to walk past the carpenter's shed where he repaired things in solitude. He would stop by the bakery's back stoop and sit, never staying long, but never brushing her away. She once offered him tea. He said he didn't drink it. But he held the cup in both hands and didn't let it go cold. There was a night, late spring, when a child went missing from the edge of town. The whole place came alive in panic. Lanterns were lit. Men shouted into the trees. Mothers held their own close. She joined the search, eyes scanning every bush and bend. And there, near the orchard fence, she found the little girl asleep beneath an overturned bucket, hiding from her brother's teasing. She lifted her gently, pressed her to her chest, and whispered soft things into her tangled curls. That's when he saw her. He had been part of the search, too. Mud on his knees, sweat on his brow. And when she walked into the circle of lantern light, cradling the girl with both arms, her face wet with tears of relief, he looked up. And he didn't look away. Not that night. Not again. He didn't speak, but something passed between them. A breath. A kind of knowing. After that, his visits shifted. He brought her a satchel once, rough leather, hand-stitched. Didn't say it was for her. Just left it on the step. She found it, turned it over in her hands, and ran her fingers along the seam. It was solid. Strong. Something built to last. The next morning, she used it to carry flour from the mill. He began carving again. Not just birds now, but small shapes she found left on her windowsill. A pine cone. A rabbit. A tiny hollow bowl. Things made of care and time. She kept them all in a box under her bed. And still, they did not speak of themselves. Not their pasts. Not their pains. It was a shared silence that felt mutual. Not hiding. Just honoring. Until the day the man who had looked at her too long came back. The blacksmith's cousin. Gone for weeks. She thought he'd moved on. But there he was, standing outside the bakery, arms crossed, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You thought I forgot you," he said, as if they had something between them that had once belonged to him. "I hoped you had," she answered softly. He stepped closer. Too close. "You're prettier when you're scared." "I'm not scared." "You should be." She didn't back away. Didn't raise her voice. But she did what she always had, she endured. She stood still and silent until he grew bored of his own menace and wandered off with a laugh. But the quiet man had seen it. He was across the road, leaning against the post near the saddlery, hands clenched too tight. Later, she found him behind the shed, splitting wood with more force than necessary. She walked up, slow, and waited. He didn't turn. "You saw?" He nodded. "I handled it." "I know." Silence. Then? "Some men don't understand kindness unless it bleeds." She swallowed. "I've bled enough for them." He lowered the axe. Stared at the ground. "I left someone once," he said. "She needed something I couldn't give. I thought I was protecting her." She said nothing. "She told me before I left that one day I'd meet someone who didn't want anything but to be seen. I didn't believe her." She stepped closer. The wind lifted a strand of her hair. It brushed his sleeve. "And now?" she asked. He looked at her. Really looked. Eyes tired but clear. "I believe her now." They stood there, two people bruised by memory, but not bowed. He lifted one hand, slowly, like asking permission, and touched the scarf at her neck. His fingers brushed the edge, not skin, just fabric. A soft question, answered only by breath. That was the first time she closed her eyes near him. Not because she feared what would come. But because, for once, she didn't. After that day, the town began to whisper again. But it sounded different now. Not curiosity. Not malice. Something like warmth. The baker smiled when he saw them sitting side by side on the back step, saying nothing. The apothecary brought an extra jar of salve without being asked. The teacher began asking her opinion on the lesson boards. It was as if the town, tired of watching, had finally decided to root for them. But shadows don't vanish just because light arrives. They stretch, curl, and wait for the sun to set. And one night, just before dusk, she found a piece of paper nailed to the door of the bakery. No signature. Just 5 words. "I know who you are." Her breath caught. The past wasn't done with her after all. She turned the paper over. Nothing else. No name. No demand. Just that one line. Enough to bring back every night she'd run, every door she'd left behind her. When he came the next morning, she didn't speak of it. But her hands trembled while kneading the dough. And he noticed. She tried to lie, say she hadn't slept, but he stepped forward, gently touched her wrist, and said, "You can tell me." And she wanted to. Oh, how she wanted to. But years of silence weren't so easily unstitched. So she shook her head. And he, quietly, just said, "Then I'll wait." Because he knew the truth didn't come like thunder. It came like spring. Slow. Reluctant. But steady. She stood beside him, both of them watching the oven rise with heat. And she knew then. He wouldn't ask her to bleed to be believed. And she would one day tell him everything. But not yet. First, she had to face what still followed her. And choose not to run. Not this time. The note stayed folded beneath her pillow for days. She didn't read it again, she didn't need to. The words had etched themselves into the hollow behind her ribs, humming like a warning bell at dawn. I know who you are. 5 words, carrying the weight of everything she'd buried. The town carried on like before. Bread still rose. Children still played stickball in the dust. The cattle still lowed across the southern ridge. But inside her, something shifted. Her laughter grew shorter. Her silences deeper. She began to walk the edge of town more, eyes following every stranger's back until they disappeared beyond the tree line. She stopped humming when she baked. He noticed. Of course he did. But he didn't press. He began to come earlier, chop more wood than needed. Sit longer on the back step, whittling a shape she couldn't name yet. She wanted to tell him. Her tongue even reached for the words some evenings. But fear has a voice all its own. And hers spoke louder. When she was small, the river near her childhood home had swallowed a whole family one spring. A wagon too heavy, horses too panicked. People said the river had a memory. That it remembered every soul it pulled under. That it whispered their names to the stones. She believed that, once. Now she only hoped the river could forget. That the past could dissolve the way water does, carving new paths, softening sharp edges, making room. But forgetting doesn't happen without a fight. One morning, a letter came by stagecoach. Not to her. To the sheriff. A folded page, sealed in wax. He read it on the porch while chewing a reed, then narrowed his eyes and walked slow toward the bakery. She watched through the window, breath caught. He was gentle. Knocked only once. I need a word, he said. They stepped around back. He didn't accuse. Didn't threaten. Just held the paper out and said, there's a bounty notice came in from back east. No names. Just a sketch. But, it favors you. She didn't reach for the paper. She only asked, how much? Enough, he said quietly, to bring dangerous men. She nodded. Didn't cry. Only leaned back against the wall and let her shoulders fall, as if a weight she'd carried for years had finally named itself. I didn't do what they said, she murmured. I didn't ask. The sheriff tucked the page into his coat. You want to leave, I'll give you a head start. You want to stay, I'll stand on your side. She met his eyes, the wind pressing her coat against her frame. I'm tired of running. He nodded once. Then let's see who's faster. You, or the lie. He left with a promise to watch the roads. She didn't tell the quiet man that night. Not yet. Instead, they walked along the orchard fence, just before dusk. The trees were blooming again. Pale petals falling like soft snow. He handed her something small. It was the carving from his pocket, now finished. A bird. Head tilted upward, wings half folded, as if mid-decision between staying and flight. She turned it in her hands, the wood smooth as river stone. It's beautiful, she said. So are you, he answered. Then added, quieter, when you forget to be afraid. She didn't respond. Not with words. Just took his hand, laid the bird in his palm, and closed his fingers around it. 2 nights later, a man rode into town. His coat was clean. His boots shined. But his eyes were wrong, too calm. The kind of calm that came from hurting people and never thinking twice. He tied his horse outside the saloon, tipped his hat to the barkeep, and said he was just passing through. But he asked too many questions for someone with nowhere to go. By dusk, the sheriff knew. He warned her. They sent someone. She asked what name he gave. Doesn't matter, he said. Men like that don't need names. Just orders. She stood in the doorway of the bakery, the light behind her, her face unreadable. Then I'll meet him, she said. The sheriff didn't argue. Only left her with a silver-handled pistol wrapped in cloth. She didn't take it. I won't be what they think I am, she said. Not again. That night, she went to the river. The one west of town, where no homes had yet risen, where only trees and stones bore witness. She didn't expect him to follow. But he did. The quiet man. Always a few steps behind, never too near. He said nothing as she sat on the bank, knees drawn up. You want to ask, she said, eyes on the water. I want to understand, he replied. She exhaled slowly. I ran from a man who owned everything. Land. Lawmen. Even time, it felt like. He owned me, too, in his eyes. She didn't pause. I married him because I was told to. I stayed because I thought there was no other way. But one night, he struck my sister. Her voice broke. So I hit back. Silence curled between them. He didn't die, she whispered. But he told the law he did. Said I fled after killing him. Promised gold to any man who dragged me back. The river lapped at the shore, gentle and indifferent. I changed my name. Changed everything. But I never stopped hearing his voice. Even now. She looked at him then. Fully. And you? She asked. He took a long breath. My brother went to war. I didn't. They called me a coward. He never came home. They said it should have been me. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she said, we both carry ghosts. And they don't know how to swim, he murmured. She reached for his hand. Not trembling. Not unsure. Just steady. And he took it. The next morning, the man from the saloon came to the bakery. Leaned on the counter. Smiled too wide. Sweet thing like you don't belong out here, he said. She didn't flinch. I belong where I choose. He tapped a coin on the wood. Your husband misses you. I buried that name. You can dig it up. She stared at him. There's no gold in my bones, she said softly. Only grit and grace. He stood straight, jaw tightening. You coming easy? Before she could answer, a voice behind him said, she's not going anywhere. The quiet man stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled, eyes calm. The stranger turned. Sized him up. You her new keeper? I'm not here to keep her, he said. Just to stand beside her. The man from the saloon reached for something beneath his coat. But the sheriff was already there, gun drawn, voice like flint. Don't. It ended without blood. But it could have gone the other way. Later, she sat on the step outside the bakery, knees pulled up, watching the wind stir the dust. He joined her. Said nothing. Just sat. After a long while, she said, you never asked me to explain. I didn't need to, he said. I saw the way you hold children. The way you speak to strangers. That tells me more than any past could. She let the silence linger. Then leaned her head gently on his shoulder. I want to stay, she whispered. Then stay. But not as a ghost. No, he said. As someone real. The river still ran. But it no longer whispered warnings. It carried only what she let it. And this time, she let it carry everything she didn't need anymore. The rain came soft at first. Just a whisper on the rooftop, like a child's sigh, barely enough to wet the stones. But in a town where dust had ruled for weeks, where even the trees seemed to bow beneath the weight of waiting, it was enough to stop the world in its tracks. She stood in the doorway of the bakery, apron in her hands, flour still clinging to her sleeves. The wind carried the scent of wet earth, and her eyes lifted skyward, as if she half believed it might not be real. But the droplets touched her face, cool, clean, steady, and something inside her eased for the first time in months. Behind her, he moved quietly, setting a steaming loaf on the shelf, his hands practiced and warm. He didn't say anything. He rarely did when the moment spoke louder than words. But when she turned, their eyes met, and a smile passed between them, one that said everything. That night, the townsfolk came out just to feel the rain. Children danced barefoot in the mud. Old women lifted their faces to the sky. Men tipped their hats and stood still, just letting it fall. And in the middle of it all, she laughed. Really laughed. Not the kind that ended in silence, but the kind that echoed. It had been so long. But joy, like rain, doesn't fall without stirring what lies beneath. The next morning, 2 more men arrived. Not strangers in saloon coats, not bounty hunters with sharp eyes and calloused hands, but lawmen. Federal. Proper badges, stamped letters, a warrant sealed with a ribbon. The sheriff met them at the edge of town. He spoke quiet, calm. But when they handed him the papers, his jaw tightened. The name on the parchment wasn't hers anymore, but the shadow of it still lived in ink. He didn't come to her right away. He walked the long way around, thinking, waiting. When he finally stepped into the bakery, his boots were heavy with rain and silence. She was rolling dough, humming again. It stopped when she saw his face. They came, didn't they? He nodded. They've got words on paper, he said. Nothing else. Just names and charges. No witnesses. No proof. But enough, she said softly, to take me. Enough, he agreed. Unless, you let me speak. I don't want you to lie. I won't. Then what can you say? He studied her. That you changed, he said. That we saw it. That no one's scared of you here. Not even the ghosts. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped into the back room and came out with a small satchel, already packed. I won't have them ruin this town, she said. Not after all it's given me. You think running again is the answer? No, she said. But maybe facing them doesn't mean surrendering. He looked at her, at the bag, at the determination in her spine. Then the quiet man stepped in. Just then. Just enough. I'll go with you, he said. She turned to him, startled. You don't even know where it leads. I don't care, he said. Wherever it goes, you won't be alone. The road to the courthouse was 5 days east by wagon. She rode in the back, beside crates of bread and apples, beneath a canvas that let in the scent of wet wood and wind. He rode beside her. Read aloud from a worn book when the nights grew long. She never asked him to. He never asked why. On the third day, they stopped by a river. Not the one near town, not the one that once whispered fear, but a new river. Wider. Deeper. Older. She stepped down and walked to the edge, shoes in her hand, toes in the mud. He watched her from the trees, arms crossed loosely. You ever think rivers can carry memory? She asked. I think they carry what we give them, he said. She nodded. Then leaned down. Picked up a stone. Held it a long while. And threw it. Hard. It landed with a splash and was gone. When they reached the courthouse, it was quiet. No crowd. No gallows. Just dust and sky and a single clerk with tired eyes and ink-stained hands. She stepped forward, the lawmen on either side, and handed in her name. The clerk looked up. You're the woman from the notice? I am, she said. He flipped through papers, paused, frowned. This file's incomplete, he muttered. No witness, no evidence, charge dropped 6 months ago. Looks like the man who filed it, your husband, was indicted himself. Perjury. Land fraud. Her breath caught. He's in prison? The clerk nodded. Was. He died last fall. She didn't move. Didn't smile. Didn't weep. She only whispered, then it's done. The lawmen offered her no apology. Only nodded, returned the badge to their coats, and turned away. It was over. But peace, real peace, is a strange thing. It doesn't shout. Doesn't arrive like a train in steam. It trickles in, soft as rain on an old rooftop. They rode home slow. Stopped often. Spoke little. There was no need. And when the town came into view again, with its lanterns flickering against dusk and smoke curling from chimneys, she reached for his hand. I want to stay, she said. Then stay. Not just in the town. I mean, in this. In you. He didn't speak right away. Just looked at her like she was a song he'd waited his whole life to remember. And then he said, You've been with me since the day you ran through my orchard. She laughed. Pressed her forehead to his shoulder. And when they reached the bakery, the townsfolk stood waiting. Not with fanfare. Not with banners. Just with bread. Warm, fresh, wrapped in cloth. An old woman kissed her cheek. A boy gave her a feather. The sheriff tipped his hat and said, Told you the lie wouldn't win. She unpacked slowly. Hung the satchel by the door. Washed the dust from her dress. And that night, when the first drop of rain fell again, gentle, rhythmic, honest, they stood by the window together. He asked her, Do you believe in rivers forgetting now? No, she said. But I believe in starting over. And in love? She turned to him. Not the kind that fixes you. The kind that waits. Walks beside you. Lets you find your own way back. He nodded. And when he kissed her, it was quiet, like a prayer. Like rain on old soil. Soft. Steady. And enough to make something new grow.